Hello, this is Emily Nyren on behalf of the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program with Georgia Pete Vickers. Today on Friday, March 15th, 2013, we are conducting this interview at Miss Vickers' home in Gainesville, Florida. Before we begin, I would just like to say thank you again for agreeing to do this. Okay, so what I would like to start with is when and where were you born?
I was born in Columbia, South Carolina in 1925, July 18, 1925.
Very nice. And when did you move to Gainesville? Did you grow up in South Carolina?
I came to Gainesville as a bride in 1946. My husband and I were married after the Second World War in June of 1946. Mm-hmm. And since he had a little time to finish in the military, we didn't move to Gainesville until about December of 1946.
And how did you two meet? You and your husband.
How did I
meet your husband?
Oh, well, that's a great story. You know, the Second World War saved many of us, as we like to say in the South, from a fate worse than death. We got married. And he was a pilot training at the Air Force Base in Columbia. And I was working at Fort Jackson, South Carolina.
Okay.
And my boss at that time was a WAC lieutenant.
Mm-hmm.
And she fixed me up with a blind date with a young pilot that she wanted me to meet. And as they say, after the first date, it was history.
And what did your parents do for a living? Were they at all involved with Holy Trinity, or?
No, my parents migrated to this country from Greece, and my father established a dry cleaning and a laundry business, and my mother helped him. In fact, all of the family except for me worked in the business. But I went on to business college and worked at Fort Jackson, South Carolina.
And what was the name of this business college? Was it in South Carolina?
Yes, it was called Peter's Hattery. He loved hats. He made a lot of hats, and he had, with his hat business, a dry cleaning and a laundry business. And he was really good because the whole time that he was in business, he did all the hats for the governors of South Carolina. As each one left office, the next one would be his next customer. And he had customers up and down the whole East Coast that would mail him their hats. You know, back then people wore felt hats, mm-hmm. that some of them were quite expensive, and he did Panamas and did a lot with it, and was very good at it, and had established a really good reputation. And he was known as Mr. Pete, and that's where I got my nickname from.
Okay.
Was from him.
Very nice. And that's your father's name is Peter?
Yeah.
Were you initially involved with Holy Trinity as soon as you moved to Gainesville?
No. When I came to Gainesville, as I said, I came as a bride. I was 21 years old, and I had never left home before. And I left not only my home and my family, I left a culture, because I had grown up in an ethnic community, mm-hmm. a Greek community, and had grown up between the Greek Orthodox Church and the Episcopal Church, because my parents were people of faith. Mm-hmm. Since there was no Greek Orthodox Church in Columbia at the time, they went to the Episcopal Church. Mm-hmm. And so as children, we went back and forth because there was no established Greek Orthodox Church, and we'd only worship when a priest from out of town would come on high holy days and give us communion. But the rest of the time, we went to Trinity Episcopal Church in Columbia, which later became Trinity Cathedral in Columbia. So the Episcopal Church was a part of my life before I was received at Holy Trinity. But when I came to Gainesville, the first time I walked into Holy Trinity, sorry
It's
about
okay.
that.
It's okay. So you were
Well, the
talking.
first time I walked into Holy Trinity, I felt at home. I just wish I had the vocabulary to express the feelings that I got. It was just like coming home. It was something very familiar because everything else in my life was so new at that time, and I loved it. I just felt totally at home, but it was an entirely different church at that time. It was a smaller church and a smaller congregation, and perhaps what I would describe it as maybe a tighter congregation. Everybody knew everybody else. And I was really fortunate because my husband went to college at the University of Florida before he went into the military. But to pay his way, he delivered newspapers. And at that time, the Gainesville Sun was an afternoon paper. And people in Gainesville always got the Times-Union from Jacksonville, which was a morning paper. And because he needed the money, he delivered the morning paper, the Times-Union, and the afternoon paper, the Gainesville Sun. So when I started meeting people at Holy Trinity and telling them who I was, they'd say, "Oh, yes, your husband was my paper boy." So that sort of gave me a little bit of an entree there. But I remember walking into Holy Trinity on Sunday mornings, and many times I would be alone, and I would sit maybe a third of the way back. And many times I'd end up being on the front row. Everybody would sit, it seems like, behind me. And at that time, we only had communion once a month instead of every Sunday as we do now. But the church had, because of the age of the wood in there, it had mellowed and it turned a nice dark color. And there was just this feeling of warmth and intimacy. And of course, the stained glass windows just gave it such a reverence that it was undescribable. For a young bride who was unsure of herself in many ways, it was really a comforting place for me.
And when was that? Was that soon after?
1946 and 7. About the end of December, and in 1947, the first few months. In about March of 1947, my husband was confirmed at Holy Trinity, and I was received. Now here, I want to back up a little bit. My husband grew up in the Baptist church, and his mother was the kind that, by the way, she had 2 daughters and 5 sons. And she did not demand that her children join the church. She said, when you're ready, then you can go be baptized and become a member of the Baptist church. Well, I always teased my husband that he was a great procrastinator, and he never got around to being baptized. So he was baptized as an adult at Holy Trinity, and our 3 daughters were later baptized there when they came along. So, that sort of added to my feeling of love for a physical place. So we were received, he was confirmed and I was received in 1947, and George Alexander was the rector at that time, and George was a young, handsome priest. And everybody liked him very, very much. And he did not stay here too long after we became members at Holy Trinity. He was called to Trinity Church in Columbia, South Carolina. And I was so pleased that on his way out of town, he stopped by our house to tell us he was on his way to Columbia. And many people that I knew in Columbia told me later that he mentioned to them that he had met me at Holy Trinity.
That's very nice. So my next question, you've already touched a little bit on about how you and your husband became affiliated with Holy Trinity. Did that play a big role? Did Holy Trinity play a big role in your life raising your 3 daughters? You said they all got baptized.
Oh, absolutely. I guess the earliest that I will mention that my first 2 daughters were less than a year apart. They were about 11 months apart. And that sort of kept me tied down having 2 babies at home. But as soon as they got old enough to go to the kindergarten class, I didn't take them much to the nursery, because it was just too much to do 2 of them at one time. But when they got old enough to be in the kindergarten class, we took them there, and they loved it, and I loved it because I could go put them in the class and go in the church and sit and say, "Thank you, Lord. I have a little breather here now, and I'm going to rest." And then later I remember going with with the younger of the 2 older girls in the kindergarten class and just enjoying watching the children. And I got to go in quite regularly with her, and eventually when the kindergarten class started up the next September, they just handed me a list and they said, "This is your class." And I became a teacher by default. They saw me there so much, they just decided to give me a class. So I did a lot of work with the kindergartners, and that's how I started off my career in the church school. So that was a lot of fun working with the little children. And I like to think that there's some prominent men in this town that I probably helped them to TT when they were little toddlers.
So you did that for a while, for many years after initially starting when your daughters were young? Mm-hmm. And did you primarily stay with the kindergarten class, or?
Oh, well, I kept graduating and going on up. I eventually became church school superintendent. Back in those days, almost everything done in the church was done by volunteers. We didn't really have a staff. In fact, I doubt we even had a church secretary. Well, I know we didn't have a church secretary until Earl Page, the rector, who was at Holy Trinity the longest. The rector just did everything himself. But then as, after the Second World War, that's when Holy Trinity began to grow, because a lot of people came from other places to finish their education at the University of Florida. In fact, the first church group that I belonged to was a circle that was started for the wives of university students. And I believe we were called St. Teresa's. And it was all wives who were helping their husbands get through the university. And at that time, we called ourselves candidates for PTHs, PHTs, putting hubby through. And that was my first involvement as an active participant outside of helping in the kindergarten. Well, I have to back up. I'm getting my time schedule a little confused. Before I had children, I was part of St. Teresa's, which was the church circle for the wives of university students. And then after the children came, I got involved in the kindergarten through them and taught classes, and then eventually in later years became church school superintendent.
Very nice. What did your husband study at UF?
He was a student in business administration.
Okay.
And he told many people it took him 10 years to get through the university. He started in 1939 and got his degree in 1949. Of course, he was out for about 4 or 5 years because of the Second World War.
Right. And what was his name?
Moscow, Mosco. Don't ask me where it came from. I asked his mother that, and she couldn't even remember where she came up with. As I say, she had 7 children,
right.
And 5 of them were boys. But at any rate, we had a lot of fun with our names, because when we'd go to events or socialize with other people, and we'd say, he's Moscow, I'm Pete, they'd get us so confused as to what our names were. But we had these crazy names.
Did you continue that on with your daughter's names, or?
No, that I did continue one thing. In my husband's family, all 7 children had names that started with an M. Mm-hmm. And I gave my children middle names that started with an M. But I gave my children names that could not be made into nicknames, because I knew how much, I won't say trouble, how much confusion at times it was going through life with a nickname. Because at Holy Trinity, nobody knew for many, many years that I had any other name than Pete. It was only after I retired and got involved in other activities that my 2 lives began to merge. I was able to keep my professional life separate from my family and Holy Trinity life as long as I was working. Mm-hmm. But after I retired, then I had to start using both names.
In your professional life, you did something besides?
I worked for the federal government. I worked
okay.
for the U.S. Department of Agriculture until I retired in 1988. 37 years with the department. And, you couldn't use a nickname like Pete.
Right.
But I said I had enough confusion when I'd call Washington and say, this is Georgia in Florida. So that was bad enough.
So my next question, what special activities have you served in the past at Holy Trinity besides being church
school superintendent? Mm-hmm. Well, I was on the vestry. After the glass ceiling was broken and they let women on the vestry, my husband was on the vestry way before I ever was. And I remember I'd wait up for him to get home and say, what'd you talk about? What'd you talk about? What did y'all decide? What did you do? What did you do? And he would tell me about the vestry meetings. I was always interested mm-hmm. in the workings of the church as well as the worship part of it. And then when June Coppathwaite, I think it was Mary Parrish, became the first woman on the vestry. And then after that, women began running for the vestry. And I was on the vestry a number of times, and I was junior warden a number of times, as was my husband. We were both active, just not at the same time. I loved being involved in the church, and my office was about 3 blocks away in the federal building. Mm-hmm. And so I could, on my coffee break or lunch hour, I could walk down to the church if I had anything I needed to do at that particular time, and could have close connections mm-hmm. With the church.
So the next few questions we'll touch on the fire.
Let me tell you about Apple.
Oh, sure.
Apple it's an acronym for Adults Pleasantly Pursuing Leisure enthusiastically. And the way that came about, I heard about this group at the Methodist Church called ALERT. And it was an acronym for Adults Learning, and I don't remember the rest of it. But that really got my attention. And so I thought, we should have something like that at Holy Trinity. So my husband and I joined the ALERT group at Trinity Methodist Church just to see how it was formed, what it did, and how to run one. So for a year, we participated in that activity and then came back to Holy Trinity and talked to the rector at that time, David Pittman. So we set up a steering committee and had a group get together, and we established Apple at Holy Trinity. And it's still active now, more than 20 years later. It's a smaller group than it was in the initial years, simply because there's so many activities at Holy Trinity that, and also retirees have changed. They certainly are more involved and more active in other things, so that there's a little difference in the character of the people attending Apple, but it's still a great group, having programs and lunches together, and I still participate and enjoy it.
Very nice. So on January 21st, 1991, that's when the fire destroyed the Holy Trinity building, as of course you understand. What were your initial and maybe later reactions to the fire? Were you there that day?
Well, that was Martin Luther King Day. And I was junior warden at the time. And I was right here at home. And interestingly, it was about the time of day as it is right now. And I got a telephone call from the church. There were some friends over here who were members of Holy Trinity. Becky and Bob Leacock were here when I got the phone call from David Colburn, who was the senior warden at the time. And Dave says, "Pete, I just got a call that there's a fire at the church, and it's pretty bad." And I said, "I'll head down there right now." So I remember walking out to the patio and telling Bob and Becky there's a fire at the church, and I'm headed down there right now. So I drove down there, and I will never forget the feeling of parking the car and walking to the curb on 2nd Avenue, 1st Avenue, and standing back and watching the flames come out through the stained glass windows. And the stained glass windows were just curling over. It was as if they were made out of plastic or rubber, and they were just curling over. And you knew that the church was not going to survive, that it was a devastating fire. And I remember standing on the curb, and my reaction was not one of, I didn't cry, I just felt challenged. I just felt this will not get us down. We will build again. Darn it, God, you can't do this to us. This just isn't fair, but we're gonna rise again. I just remember feeling challenged. A reporter came up to me. Somebody had said, she's the junior warden, so why don't you talk to her? And she asked me, what is your reaction? And I remember saying to her, I feel challenged. She didn't get it. She didn't understand what I was saying, because the next day that sentence was not in her article in the paper. She asked me what the church meant to me, and I said, well, this is where my husband was baptized. This is where my 3 daughters were baptized, and I just have a lot of family history with it, and I will miss it terribly. But all the while, my feeling was just one of being challenged. It was a devastating feeling. And I remember saying to David Pittman later in the week, there had been this little controversy at the time. I love these kind of stories about the church. David Pittman, when David Pittman came to Holy Trinity as rector, the altar was against the wall in the altar area. And David did not like that. He wanted to be able to stand and face the congregation when he was preparing for communion. As it was, when he was preparing communion, his back was to the congregation. And he said, I really should be facing the congregation. Well, there was some controversy. Some people resented it, some people objected, some people were very articulate about their dislike of touching anything at Holy Trinity. Well, David did prevail, and they did move the altar out. And I said to David, oh, David, see what you did? You moved the altar and the church burned. And he said, you know, Pete, unfortunately, there's some people that are actually going to believe that. There were even rumors that there might have been protests because of Martin Luther King Day. But of course it wasn't. Just some mentally deranged man who went around burning churches set fire intentionally to Holy Trinity. In those days, you could keep the church doors open all the time, and people were welcome to come in and sit, meditate, pray, whatever they needed. But unfortunately, this person came with the intention of burning the church. And it was unfortunate. At that time, the Holy Trinity was the first church burning. He burned a number of other churches in Gainesville, none of them totally as the way he did Holy Trinity. And of course, being a downtown church and being a rather historic church, because some of the pioneer families of Gainesville were and still are the descendants, members of Holy Trinity. So it was well known in the community. In fact, there would be a plethora of brides who would come to Holy Trinity and ask if their weddings could be at Holy Trinity, because it was such a beautiful church. And they would have no affiliation with the church, but simply wanted to have a pretty setting for their weddings. And so it was a well-known building in Gainesville, and being right downtown as it was.
And that's a perfect segue into our next question. Because Holy Trinity is very involved with the downtown community, that was one of the reasons, from what I understand, that the church decided not to relocate, as a lot of other churches did in the past few decades. Do you agree with the church staying in the same location? How do you feel about that?
Oh, yes, definitely. When I first came to Holy Trinity, it was downtown, and it wasn't downtown. All those big old houses on First Street, that many of them lawyers' offices now, people lived in them. There were a number of people who walked to church on Sunday morning. In fact, we had 2 big houses right next to the church. At that time, all the property the church had was what the church was sitting on, with a little L shape on the backside. But it was more or less landlocked, the original church that was there. So it was downtown, but it was still residential. Many people walked to church on Sunday morning and lived close by the church. When the church burned, and we started all the focus groups to see what we would do about rebuilding the church, there were people who felt that because the population of Gainesville was moving westward, that's where the young families would be, and that's where we should go to keep up with them. But there were also many people who felt that Holy Trinity should stay where it was. Now, I will grant you that a lot of that was emotional. Much of it was sentimental. Mm-hmm. But there's nothing wrong with those feelings. It was the connection that people had. Many people said, oh, I want to rebuild the church right here, and I want it rebuilt exactly the way it was before. It was that kind of an attachment. Now, we're always told, and intellectually, we know that a church is not a building, it's the people that make the church. And I agree with that. But I don't underestimate the value and the attachment that you can have to a physical place. And somehow, I can see both sides. But I was one of the ones who definitely wanted to remain downtown. And I love being a downtown church. It absolutely did change the character of the church over the years. Because we are downtown, we draw from all over the city. Mm-hmm. And because we do, we get a wonderfully rich, diverse group of people. I can see where people would want to belong to a church in the suburbs, mm-hmm. where all your friends and your neighbors, you're all in the same socioeconomic group. Mm-hmm. You all have many of the same values and feelings of raising your family. But there's also, that can also be a rather oppressive, maybe oppressive is a little too heavy, keeping you from experiencing right. other types of people or other types of cultures. Being downtown, I think, has enriched Holy Trinity so much because we do have a very diverse congregation. And on top of that, it's a group of wonderful people who are so motivated, so dedicated, and so rich in talents that I just can't tell you how fortunate I feel we are. And I love being able to help the homeless. Mm-hmm. I love being able to participate in the interfaith hospitality network that helps families that are without homes. We dedicated that to helping children. It was just horrible to think of families with children living in their cars because they did not have a home. So yes, I definitely wanted to stay downtown. Now, there were some people who were unhappy about that, mm-hmm. and they were able to start St. Joseph's Church, which was close to Newberry, and at the time we had St. Michael's Church, which was a fairly active church too, and I think some people might have migrated to that. But by and large, I think the core congregation remained at Holy Trinity.
And I understand at least one of the stained glass windows was out being worked on the day of the fire, so that is still in the building. Is that true?
The what?
One of the, I think it was the main stained glass window was out.
Oh!
You can answer.
Sorry again.
Nope.
Hello? Yes. Yeah. Uh-huh. Oh, well, good. Well, can I get something in writing? A receipt? Oh. I'm not sure. I'll have to check my file. Uh-huh. Okay, if I don't find it, I'll give you a call. All right. And I love what you do. Thank you. Bye-bye. Southern Law Poverty Center. That's a first. Just call to say thank you for a donation.
Oh, that's nice.
Sorry about that.
Oh, no, it's fine.
I forgot what we were talking about.
We were talking about the window.
Oh, the Ascension. The Ascension window. Yes, we had been having some trouble with that window before, and it was taken out. God works in mysterious ways, I'll tell you. The first Ascension window was lost by a tree that crashed into it during a hurricane. And then the women of the church donated the money to replace it, which is the one that's in there now. But in order to do the work, they had to take the stained glass out and repair all whatever you call the stuff that holds the window in there. So it was just really fortunate, because that would have been difficult to replace. Now, one of the things, in fact, I was just telling somebody just the other day, the stained glass windows in Holy Trinity were so beautiful, and you could almost read the history of Gainesville by looking at the names of people that the windows were dedicated to, old families in Gainesville that had donated the stained glass windows in the original church, which was built in 1904. The beautiful thing about that, some of these families did not even have descendants who were current members at Holy Trinity. But almost every one of those windows were replaced by the original family that donated the first window, although they were not members of Holy Trinity. And I just thought that said a lot about the history of Holy Trinity. So that was really nice, because we were able to replace the windows with a wonderful company from France who actually does repair work for the old cathedrals all over Europe. First class work. It would have been so difficult financially to replace the Ascension window, plus the fact that we love having the history of having it there. And I'll tell you something. I remember the first time I had occasion to make an announcement from the chancel area. 3 steps up to the chancel area, looking out over the congregation on a Sunday morning, and that's east. You're looking eastward, and having the sun come through the Ascension window. I remember just thinking, oh my God, a most sincere prayer, not an exclamation, most incensed prayer at the beauty of the sun coming through that stained glass. And I thought, gosh, how do the priests get over that every Sunday morning, standing here and being able to see that? Just really a wonderful moment. And I cherish that because I can't see that anymore. I don't get that wonderful view of the sun coming through the stained glass. But it's a wonderful feeling, a wonderful memory.
And how did you personally contribute to the quote-unquote downtown mission of the church?
You know, I love that. Well, I like to think I was pretty instrumental in getting the Interfaith Hospitality Network started at Holy Trinity. Can I tell you that story?
Absolutely, sure.
Right after the fire, let me back up. Right before the fire, I will say, David Pittman got a phone call from Karen Olson, who was in New Jersey, Union, New Jersey. And she told him about an organization that she had started called the Interfaith Hospitality Network, and that she would like to come down and talk to him about starting a network in Gainesville. And David had said, well, let me think about it. Well, in the meantime, the fire came, and we lost our church. Well, David had planned a workshop to help the poor. I'm not saying it very elegantly. I can't remember exactly how it was titled, but certainly a little better than that. And so even though we didn't have a place to meet, we met down at the First Methodist Church. They let us use one of their rooms. And we had a great group of people who came, and there were several different components to this workshop. And again, my memory fails me on what some of the components of it was. But one was helping the homeless. And I remember that had the largest group of sign-ups for that particular workshop. And the reason for that was we knew very acutely what it felt like to be homeless. Mm-hmm. We really felt homeless not having our own church. And so that was the largest group that participated. And I think David, in his wisdom, had designed this workshop to segue into getting a committee up for the Interfaith Hospitality Network. He didn't know how well that was going to work out because of losing our own church. Mm-hmm. So out of that particular workshop, we had a smaller committee that met with Karen Olson. And she told us what the Interfaith Hospitality Network did. She told us how she started it. She and her sons, she would ride the subway into New York to go to work, and she would notice all these homeless people slumped around the subway station, and there was one in particular that was always in the same spot, and it was an elderly woman. And so one day she stopped to speak to the woman, and she noticed how eager the woman was to have human contact with somebody else. And this touched Karen Olson's heart so much that she began bringing sandwiches to give out to the homeless people. And she noticed that how eager they were to have this connection with somebody else who was interested in them, who gave them some attention. And she would bring her young sons, and they would give out these sandwiches. And out of that, she got the idea to form this network with churches to house homeless people or homeless families for 1 week at the time, with a big core of volunteers so that nobody was overworked. So it sort of grew out of that workshop. And I remember going around, we started it at Holy Trinity, the core committee. And my job was to go around to various churches to make a talk and see if they would agree to be a host church, if they would agree to house homeless families. Well, now this happened over a period of time. In the meantime, before we even had Karen Olson come down, we were starting on the project to rebuild the church. And by the time we got the church itself rebuilt, then we could give full attention to starting the Interfaith Hospitality Network. And I remember going to the vestry. I said to David, I cannot go to other churches and ask them to be a host church unless we are a host church. Right. So I went to the vestry and I explained the concept and asked for their permission to house up to 14 people in our church for 1 week, provide them bedding and food. And I remember the reaction was, here we had just spent $4 million to build a new church. So they said, you want to house who, where? And bless them though, the vestry did approve Holy Trinity being the first host church. So from that, I was able to go to other churches and say, will you agree to house homeless people for 1 week? And we showed a little video that explained the concept. And from that, we now have an office here in town with a director, with a social worker, and we've done some wonderful things for some of the homeless families. And up until I lost my vision and could no longer drive, I would be a breakfast host, because I don't mind getting up early in the morning. The breakfast host has to be there at the church by 6 o'clock in the morning. So I could do that. Now that I can no longer drive and host, I'm a telephone person. I call people to remind them of their duties in the program. So I like staying involved in it because it is a wonderful program.
That sounds very nice. Would you say that was and Apple were two of your biggest activities at the church? Was there anything else after being involved with the church school?
Well, gosh, I don't know that. I don't know that I can measure one being more important than the other. At the time that I served on the vestry, I loved doing that. I loved being junior warden. I just loved being involved. Mm-hmm. The main thing I would say, the hospitality, the Interfaith Hospitality Network, was to be able to go from within the church into the community. Mm-hmm. That's why I love the downtown ministry now, because we are not just ministering to ourselves. That's important, to minister to your community, but you don't want to get so inbred that you forget there's a world out there. So I like the idea that we're doing things that involves us in the community, and that we are helping people. You know, that's the whole purpose of Christianity, is to help each other. And so that, to me, fulfills us as true Christians to be able to do that.
Was your husband involved in activities outside of Holy Trinity, like you were?
My husband, as I say, was involved before I actually was. And sometimes a convert is even stronger than someone from within the group. Yes, he was very, very involved. And he was, his specialty was hardware and building equipment. He worked for a large hardware business, Baird Hardware in Gainesville, which was like an institution. It was the front runner of the big box stores like Home Depot or Lowe's, but it was locally owned. It was a local family and a local business. And he was retail store manager of that. Well, he later left that and went to work at the university as a purchasing agent, doing basically the same thing, but for the university rather than for a business. At any rate, he was junior warden a number of times, and the junior warden at that time was responsible for the physical facilities of the church. And he, because his business was close to the church, just a block away actually, he was able to spend a lot of time at the church keeping up, contracting with builders or roofers or whatever to work on the facility itself. So that was his main contribution to the church. And also, the years that he was on the vestry was when the rector lived in a house that was provided by the church. And at that time, we wanted to build a new rectory, and he was chairman of that committee that built the new rectory. And he said it was the first committee he was ever on that when they got through, everybody still liked each other. He and two women were the committee there, and it just ended up beautifully. But yes, he was very active until he came down with Parkinson's disease, and then he was no longer able to make contributions to the church in helping in that way. My main contribution now, I feel, I like to stay involved, is being able to give financially to the church.
And what about your daughters? Are any of them still living in Gainesville?
Well, I had 3 daughters, and out of the 3, one of them, let's say religion took. She lives down the street from me, as a matter of fact.
Oh,
she's
wow.
the one that teaches school, and she's very active at Holy Trinity. She's on the Altar Guild, and she is now participating in the EFM Episcopal ministry. EFM. Can't even remember what it's for, but it's a 4-year course that they take to prepare them for ministry within the church. She was always loved the church, even as a little girl. I remember one time we had relatives visiting us for the weekend, and it poured rain that Sunday, so we decided we would not go to church because we wanted to spend the time with our family at home. But she insisted that her father drive her to Sunday school and then go back in the rain to pick her up because she did not want to miss Sunday school. At the time, there was what they called the Junior Altar Guild, and this would take girls who were in at that time it was called junior high school, junior high school girls, and trained them for the altar guild. And Kay was the last girl that opted to do that. And I remember Caroline Richardson, bless her heart, offered to do the training for her. So they would meet one day a week for months. And Kay went through that training for the altar guild. And then for many years she had left Gainesville and wasn't living here, but when she came back, she did join the altar guild, and she's active on that now.
Were your daughters raised here? Did you always live in this house in Gainesville, or?
Yes, and they all went to Sunday school, starting with the kindergarten class, and went through. I told them they absolutely had to go to church till they were 16 years old. And then 2 of them at 16 said, "Okay, Mom." I did it. As Earl Page used to say, there's some people just don't like to be institutionalized. I am happy with the type of people they are. They are wonderfully productive, wonderfully caring, wonderfully giving kind of people. And so I consider that their training in Sunday school certainly helped to make them who they are. They just don't choose to actively participate now.
How do you see Holy Trinity impacting Gainesville today? You touched on the help with the homeless community, but anything else?
Oh my, yes, yes. You know, we're embarking on a project. We just had a capital funds campaign, and the projects that the church has come up with, and I think they will materialize, but it will be over a period of years. We now have, instead of Episcopal Child Caring Center, which was, what do you call it, like daycare, except we took infants. It's now the Holy Trinity Episcopal School, and it will eventually grow into grades.
Wow.
On up, hopefully, at some point, all the way through high school. But this is the very beginning, and that will certainly contribute to Gainesville. There's also a plan to establish a bookstore, which will be right on Main Street. Somebody mentioned that it would be called Window on Main Street, which I love. I just think that's wonderful. And I can just see all kinds of good things coming out of that. I think, gosh, we have such a wonderful downtown ministry right now that I think that may grow. Maybe someday, I'm just dreaming now. Maybe someday we can grow to the point of even having in-house social services that we can help people even more with getting back on their feet or helping them to get established. But I think all of that is well into the future. Now there's some people that I don't know if you even want this in your interview, that would prefer that the church stay small and not take on so much.
Right.
And there's merit to that thought also. I think our saving grace right now is that even though we are active in a whole variety of different things, like the Cuban ministry that we have, that we're still cohesive enough that each group supports the other group, and sort of nobody's in competition with each other. Let me put it that way. At least that's the way I feel about it. But I think Gainesville will definitely have a growing impact on downtown Gainesville. Certainly our presence will be felt by the amount of real estate that we have been able to acquire, and I applaud them for having enough vision to get that property now while we can, while it is available.
And the plan for a school, would that be located near the church, or is there enough room?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I would hope it would be. But I don't know for sure what those plans are. I haven't involved myself in that, but we are certainly acquiring enough property around the church to be able to do that. Definitely in the beginning, where you can only do this, say perhaps a few grades at the time, that it be. I always think of, one of my daughters lived in New York City for 29 years, and when she was there, I visited quite often, and in the apartment house that she was in, their apartment was on about the 5th floor, and she was in a wonderful sort of residential area in Manhattan. You went 2 blocks one way and you were at Riverside Park, and you went 2 blocks the other way and you were at Central Park. Well, in the area, I'd say it was about 1.5 blocks away from her, was an Episcopal school, and on the top of the building was their athletic field. That's where they played soccer, tennis, football, whatever. Well, I slept on a sofa bed in the living room when I would visit. And right next, the bed was right next to a window that looked out. And because her apartment was on the 5th floor, I would wake up in the morning to hearing children laughing and playing. They would be out on their athletic field, either running or playing tennis or whatever they were doing. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm in the middle of New York and I feel like I'm out in the country. And I thought that was so wonderful. And sometimes I would see the children going to and from school in their little uniforms, and it just looks so good. And when we talk about a school at Holy Trinity, I immediately think back to that Episcopal school in the middle of Manhattan, and envision, I won't be here to see that. I'm not going to live that long, but I'm sure it will come. I'm sure it will come about.
And what is the work exactly that you do with first-year medical students now at UF?
Oh, I love that program. It's called the Interdisciplinary Family Health, IFH. Students who are in their first year of their discipline, I get 3 of them at the time. Let's see, this time I had a physical therapist, an MD, and a nurse. Over the years, I've had a mix of a dentist, a pharmacist, a doctor, a nurse, whatever, And they come for about 4 or 5 visits over the year. The purpose of the program, being interdisciplinary, is to teach them to work together in the various disciplines and also how to relate, let's say, to lay people, to interact with people. They would love to have a family, I'm sure, but I don't know how many families they can get, because it is sort of a commitment to be available for their visits. Fortunately for me, other than my vision and my hearing, I don't have a lot of medical problems. I'm relatively healthy for my age, so I don't have a lot of stuff. But we do a lot of discussing. Other people they might visit might have some medical problems that they can now they make it clear they can't give you any advice or treatment or anything like that. But one of the purposes too is when they finish with you, they like to do a project, something that will help you. I have a difficult time coming up with anything that I need that they can do.
Right.
But we have great discussions about their disciplines, and I love it because everyone I've had seems to be dedicated to what they're doing. This particular group, they have wonderful plans. One of them is already planning to do healthcare work in Mexico. That's where she got the bug. She went, I think, maybe in high school on a mission job there, and she knew that she wanted to be a nurse and help people. And to this day, her plan is still to go back to Mexico and work with people. The other one, that's an MD, her family is from Jamaica. Now, she was born in South Florida, but she definitely wants to help people in third world countries, she said. The physical therapist, the way he got into the program or made the decision to go in, he had at some point in his life some kind of a back problem, and he went to physical therapy, and it helped him so much. He said, I want to do this for other people there. So it's really great to get with young people that are still idealistic, but have purpose and focus. And so I really enjoy that. We had our last visit yesterday, as a matter of fact, so they'll be moving on.
How did you get started with that program? Were you told about it?
I coordinate a low vision support group. When I realized, when I realized that I was losing my vision, I discovered there was no support group in town for low vision people. I discovered the value of support groups when my husband had Parkinson's disease. We became part of a Parkinson's support group, and I found it invaluable in not only moral support and emotional support from each other, but getting practical information. Why don't you try this? Or I tried that and it worked, Caregivers. We the spouses would always meet while our husbands or wives were exercising, and we would swap information. And I thought, we need that for a low vision group. At any rate, we meet at Holy Faith Catholic Church, and the people who run the interdisciplinary family health program asked if they could come and talk to us, looking for volunteers. So when they came, I coordinate the program, and I said, well, you have to understand that you'll just be getting singles, because most of us are older people with vision loss. And they said, you're a family of one, and we'd love to have you. So about 3 of us agreed to participate in the program. That's been 5 or 6 years ago. And each one of us really enjoys it. We enjoy the students. Being a university town, we feel keenly about participating in the university study programs. Unfortunately, I can no longer participate because most of the programs require that you have some vision. And so I am on their list at the Institute on Aging. And I said, why don't you just take me off? There's nothing I can do. She said, oh, no, we might come up with something that we'll need you for. So we like to stay involved with the university.
Well, we've gone through most of the questions that I've been given from the church. Is there anything else that you would like to add, that either relating to Holy Trinity or something that we might not have touched on?
Just from a personal point of view, when my husband died, the support and love that I received from my church family, from Holy Trinity, is it just made things so much easier for me to go through. And I realized at that point how important the church, and specifically Holy Trinity, is to me and my life. And so that's why I'm so glad to be able to participate in something like this and to leave some history behind for those who will come later. Because I can remember sitting in the old church, and I guess forever in my lifetime, time will be divided by the old church and the new church. Those will be my landmarks for dating things. But I remember sitting in the old church and just blessing the people who came before me and made that church possible, not only in the building of it, but in the maintaining it through the Depression years, through the war years, and later in my own life through all the social upheavals that we went through integration. And I realized sitting there that it was up to me and the people who are here now to carry it on for the future generations. And they'll come, more and more of them, on down the line. My granddaughter participated in Holy Trinity until she went away to college. And so there'll be many generations that will come in later years. And I hope that someday some of them sit there and say thank you to the future generation.